All right, I think we'll get started. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another Committee for Sydney online briefing. And it was not our plan to do this online, of course, but we are adjusting, and we really appreciate you staying with us as we all convert our lives and our work to lockdown again. I'm Gabriel Metcalf, CEO of the committee, and I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and wherever you are joining us from. I am on the land of the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I want to also acknowledge the Committee for Sydney Innovation Fund partners who provide core funding to support our research, Dexis, the ICC, McKinsey, Campbelltown Council, Western Sydney Uni. We are absolutely delighted to have Amy Brown joining us today, the recently appointed CEO of Investment New South Wales. Many of you will know Amy from her previous roles, most recently at DPC, but she has a very long and distinguished CV. She is, of course, also the new boss of Eamon Waterford, our former head of policy. So while Amy is a longtime friend of the committee's, the organization she is now running is new. Investment New South Wales brought together pieces of economic development from a lot of different places under one roof. So that includes the jobs, investment, tourism and trade groups from Treasury, Destination New South Wales, Research and Development New South Wales, various economics branches from DPC, probably lots of other bits as well. So it's a major reorganization of government that is now absolutely essential to the long-term prosperity of New South Wales. So we are thrilled, Amy, that you are taking some time to talk with us about the potential of this new agency you're running. So the way this works, everybody, Amy will make her remarks, and then we'll open it up for discussion, questions and answer. You can submit them via the Q&A app or function on Zoom, and I will sort through them. You can also text or email. Some have already come in, and I will, I'll do my best. So with that, Amy, take it away. You're on mute still.
That's terrible, isn't it? You think, 18 months into this that we'd know to double check whether we're on mute. But anyway, glad you didn't hear me all rustling on my papers in the background. So thank you so much, Gabe, for having me. Thank you for inviting me to speak to your committee members. And you're absolutely right that I've been a friend of the committee for a long time now, back from when I was in New South Wales Treasury, and I was working hard on infrastructure projects and also some really important issues around stuff like social housing. And then, through my time at PwC and then DPC and now in this role. So thank you so much, Gabe, for all your kind of loyalty and support and for giving me this platform to get the word out there, I suppose. I will also start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I am talking to you from, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'm in Sydney CBD right now, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And so I really wanted to spend some time with you today to talk to you about this new government agency that was set up by the Premier on the 29th of March. I know that makes us at least 100 days old because we had our 100-day birthday a couple of weeks ago and got to celebrate with our internal organisation, albeit in the virtual mechanism. But so we're 100 days old and a bit. And since the Premier set us up, we've really spent a bit of time figuring out who we are and what we want to be and how we can make a difference to New South Wales. Gabe has already talked about, New South Wales as a prosperous society, a society where everyone has access to great work opportunities, where individuals have the mechanisms and the environments where they can innovate, create new and better products, services, and ways of doing things, where kids are given tools to be able to aspire and dream, where we have strong public health system and public education. And we're wondering what part Investment New South Wales can play in all of that. So I'll talk you through a bit of that today. But in terms of who we are and what we do, I wanted to start the presentation with 2 words, and that is why now? Why was it on the 29th of March, with the stroke of a pen and an admin order, did the Premier decide to bring us into being? And if Australia is known as the lucky country, our view is that New South Wales is the even luckier state. So prior to the pandemic, cast your mind back and remember that Australia enjoyed almost 29 years of uninterrupted economic growth, unmatched by any jurisdiction worldwide. Last year was literally the first time in recorded history that New South Wales experienced negative annual growth. If it were a country, New South Wales would rank 4th in the world for workers with tertiary qualifications. Sydney is the financial capital of Australia and ranks 10th on the Global Financial Centres Index. New South Wales has more arable land per person than anywhere else in the world, offering enormous potential for agriculture and ag tech. New South Wales ranks only 3rd behind California and Singapore for its number of startup founders. And 1 in 7 researchers in New South Wales are in the global top 10 researchers in at least one specialised topic. And we all know that over the past 10 years, this government has a focus on delivering the infrastructure that our state needed. We have built, grown and opened more infrastructure than anywhere else in the world. In fact, we opened more public transport in than any other city around the world outside of China in the last 2 years. And so if the last decade was all about infrastructure for New South Wales, this decade is all about transforming the economy. So focusing for a moment then on our COVID-19 response. Now, I know we're in a bit of a tough predicament right now to be able to kind of talk with a smile on our face about COVID-19 and about what it's like to live in New South Wales during the pandemic. But even now that, we're sitting here in lockdown, wearing masks in many different circumstances with, restrictions on where we can go and what we can do. And if we're a business, whether we can even open, the effective reproductive rate for the disease actually sits at around 1 or just under 1. For those of you who are epidemiologists out there, you'll actually know that that actually means that through restrictions and these things that we're having to do at the moment, the disease itself is actually quite under control. Each person with the illness is only transmitting it to an average of 1 other person. And so, by world standard, that's actually considered to be pretty good if we can maintain our control of the illness and get everybody vaccinated as quickly as possible so that we can move around and conduct business as freely as we wish to again. But even over the last 18 months, from our state's open border policy insofar as we possibly can, to our extremely strong public health system, to our community's ability to rally around the issue and wear masks to Woolies and sit on green dots and do generally what's been asked of us, New South Wales's handling of the pandemic has been strong. We've announced $33 billion in stimulus and COVID-19 response measures and tax breaks, even right up until a couple of weeks ago, has really delivered targeted support for people, families and communities. Our government's focus has been on protecting jobs, helping business and ensuring that vulnerable members of the community are supported. It's all about getting the right help to the right people at the right time. So with all of that in mind, Investment New South Wales has been created. What is our mandate? Well, our job is to reinforce New South Wales as the most desirable place in the world to visit, invest and do business, and to catalyze the transformation of our state for the prosperity of New South Wales and for the benefit of all. To do this, the Investment New South Wales brings New South Wales Government's economic development and investment attraction activities into the one place as a single point of accountability for the private sector, allowing us to leverage our state's successful COVID-19 response and drive local and international investment and create jobs for New South Wales. We work across key industries and sectors, and our aim is to reinforce New South Wales's global position as a safe and attractive place to do business, and to market Sydney and New South Wales on the world stage as a destination for business investment, global talent, tourism, major events, and international study. The next slide, I jokingly call my multiple master disaster, but it just goes to show how much political commitment there is behind making sure that New South Wales businesses can scale and export and go global, that global investment is driven into New South Wales, and that all of the opportunities around R&D are kind of commercialised and generate as many jobs possible. So we were set up by the Premier of New South Wales, the Honourable Gladys Berejiklian. We then have the Deputy Premier and Minister for Regional New South Wales Industry and Trade, John Barilaro, the Minister for Jobs, Investment, Tourism and Western Sydney, Honourable Stuart Ayres, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Premier, the Honourable Gabrielle Upton. We also have other ministers outside of that who are really interested in what we do. So Minister Dominello for digital technology, for example, or Minister Keane for kind of net zero initiatives, Minister Constance for what we can do that really integrates some innovative ways of providing metro stations and precincts that surround them. So there's a lot going on for us ministerially, but you know, we absolutely want to kind of make hay while the sun shines and make sure that we do as much as possible with all of this political commitment. As for me, I manage a team of kind of 7 managing directors or equivalents, and about 500 public servants across the state and internationally. We're actually a global business, and we'll get to that in a moment. Prior to that, as Gabe mentioned, I was Deputy Secretary of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and I really focused on providing commercial, strategic and economic advice to the Premier, including a bunch of important whole of government policies, delivering on things like unsolicited proposals, direct deals, economic strategies, and so on. Prior to that, I was a partner of PwC. And interestingly, my whole career up until that point really was on that kind of interplay between the private sector and the public sector. I was a lawyer, predominantly advising private sector consortia bidding for government projects. And then I decided I kind of wanted to get off the bench and get into the action, and actually joined government to help drive and deliver those projects. So that kind of the harnessing the power of what both the public sector and the private sector have to offer is absolutely what I'm all about. And I think probably why the Premier chose me for this role. In terms of our partners, is one of the reasons that Tim Reardon loves this slide is because other than Department of Regional and New South Wales, who is a close colleague of ours, all of these agencies are within the Premier and Cabinet cluster. It really does show the shift in kind of focus from the traditional role of Premier and Cabinet, which is extremely important, being custodians of the Cabinet and the Cabinet processes and Cabinet decision making. And custodians of public policy, and into more of a kind of delivery role. Including Create New South Wales, which very much drives our arts and culture programs, including our arts screen and culture focus, a big jobs driver here in our state. Greater Sydney Commission, which leads metropolitan planning to make Greater Sydney more productive, sustainable and livable, and is now also in charge of precinct development. And given the interplay between jobs, investment and precincts, we are very much hand in glove on a daily basis. We have Western Parkland City Authority, which is tasked with the ginormous task of delivering the Western Parkland City, and of course Infrastructure New South Wales, who we all know and love, who help us with the $107 billion infrastructure program over the next 4 years. Well, in amongst all of that though, what's Investment New South Wales got to do with it? Why did we come to be? Well, our main tagline that we're working through at the moment is we make opportunities happen. Our role is not just to kind of sit back and be passive and wait until someone contacts government because they may or may not have an innovative idea. We actually go out and proactively hunt and seize opportunities. That might be opportunities for a new export market for a domestic business. It might be setting up an overseas office to represent New South Wales. It might be a potential for overseas students to come and study here. It might be an overseas company wishing to set up its headquarters here in New South Wales. There's so many, or it might be the billions of dollars worth of global capital that's looking for a home in the kind of the transition toward net zero and the decarbonisation agenda. All of this is something that we're extremely interested in, where it creates greater investment into and job opportunities arising within New South Wales. In terms of what we brought together to enable us to do this, and this is why it's kind of taken us a while to look at all the pieces of the puzzle and say, right, how are we all going to work even better now that we're all in one spot. We'll start with the 24-hour economy commissioner. It's going to be so much easier for me to sell New South Wales as a destination for global business if we have a vibrant, livable, culturally interesting economy where there's safe activities and inspiring activities to do day and night. And Commissioner Michael Rodriguez has been brought into New South Wales Government to really be put in charge of who are all the different players across our economy, including into small business, the various parts of government, entertainment industries, and so on, that need to come together to make that happen. Destination New South Wales, we all know and love. They've existed for a long time before investment was born, and they very much market Sydney and New South Wales as a world premier tourism and major destination event. And so working with them is fantastic because they really are like our marketing department on steroids. And how can they market New South Wales to be a place, yes, to visit, but to form a lifelong relationship with our state, including where you come back and study and do a degree, move your family here for a period of your career, invest your new business proposition, and so on. Our Jobs Plus program I'll cover in a moment, but Jobs Plus program and unsolicited proposals are two different funnels for businesses to come in and engage directly with New South Wales in order to be able to access incentives to establish or expand their presence here. We have our industry networks and partnerships, our economic policy, industry networks partnerships, and that includes things like Defence New South Wales and also implementing our cyber security strategy. So how are we actually engaging with business in a very close way in order to deliver on those strategies. We've got experts in economic analysis and strategy to say, okay, well, if Investment New South Wales tries to be all things to all people, will be nothing to nobody. So what are the actual various industries that we should be focusing in where New South Wales has a competitive advantage that we want to make the most of? We have a team that supports the international student sector who've been working so hard in supporting international students who've been impacted by the pandemic, onshore and offshore. We have amazing scientific experts through the Office of New South Wales Chief Scientist and Engineer, and that's very much about delivering on the opportunities to boost research and development by government, the private sector and universities through the Waratah Research Network and the newly formed R&D New South Wales. And then we have support for our startup and investment ecosystem through the City Startup Hub, for example. Our global network is something that is extremely powerful. So we've kind of upped the ante to establish a new kind of hub and spoke model globally. That enables us to have standalone New South Wales government offices in our hub locations, being London, New York, Tokyo, Mumbai, Singapore, and Shanghai or Guangzhou. And then coming off of those hub offices, we have multiple spokes, and those spokes are often in an office shared with Austrade so that we can complement and feed off each other's kind of networks and intel in the various markets. We have just recently announced and put in post Agent General into London and a Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner into Tokyo. And we're currently interviewing some absolute global top talent to go into our other hubs. And then we will continue to roll out our presence globally. Now, this is extremely important for New South Wales, not just so that we can help our New South Wales businesses export, although that is a very key part of the role, but also to hunt for foreign direct investment back into New South Wales from those offshore markets. And even speaking, our Senior Trade Investment Commissioner for Tokyo only started a week and a half ago, and the intel that he has brought into us of the kind of Japanese and the North Asian market has been extraordinary. to enable us to understand really the nuances around various businesses that you just can't quite get when you're onshore here in Australia. It's about having that offshore presence and that depth of relationships in market, and I think it will really enable us to up the ante from a competitive point of view by having that presence globally. Now, the next thing I just wanted to run you through is, well, what are some of the incentives that we're offering global business to locate or expand their footprint here in New South Wales? These examples pretty much all stem from the Jobs Plus program. Jobs Plus is a $250 million fund that can be deployed to assist with things like co-funding of infrastructure, technology, skills and training programs, etc. But there's also multiple other things that we can do in a kind of concierge sense in terms of accessing payroll tax exemptions, helping accelerate planning approvals, access government land, and perhaps enabling long-term leases of that government land. We're looking at streamlining regulation, as I said, connecting with global markets, commercializing research, co-investing in skills and technology, and then supporting the development of precincts and places with high levels of connectivity and amenity and livability to make sure that we have the landing pad for global business and talent to want to locate in. And as I said, that's where we work very closely with the Greater Sydney Commission as they do what they do to curate and enable place. Our first 100 days has been pretty full on, to tell you the truth. So because there were so many of these initiatives which had already started cranking up before it was all brought into Investment New South Wales, it meant we actually were able to hit the ground running on multiple things. So we've had a number of opportunities announced through our Jobs Plus program, including medtech companies, Speed DX, Baxter Healthcare, and a cybersecurity initiative with Macquarie Telecom announced just last week. We've progressed the Turning Ideas into Jobs Accelerating R&D Action Plan, and that included $24 million small business innovation research program to commercialise innovative solutions. That was announced in the budget. We've led the planning of a state-based plan for the return of international students in close collaboration with the federal government. We've launched the New South Wales Cyber Hub at York Street Startup Hub and progressed work on implementing our cybersecurity strategy. We've enabled significant support for the defence industry, including $1.3 million to the Defence Innovation Network and promoting 23 of our defence-based innovators at land forces. We've entered into a historic 5-year innovation partnership agreement with the CSIRO to drive digital technology, manufacturing and health excellence across our innovation precincts. A skills funding agreement, a commitment of $12 million between the New South Wales Government and visual effects and animation company ILM to boost post-digital visual effects industry, and some pretty impressive advances in the space race, including a $1.4 million space research network. And that's just what we can talk about publicly. There's a lot in the pipeline, so get ready for another burst of announcements, particularly as we accelerate out of our current restrictions. Well, as I said before, we don't want to, while we work across all sectors, we actually have been pretty deliberate in terms of, well, what are the opportunities that we're actually chasing? Because where is it that New South Wales can get its biggest bang for its buck in terms of economic benefit and jobs? And a lot of that is based on, well, what are our underlying competitive advantages? Where are we well placed globally? And what are the opportunities opening up in supply chains as the world recovers from COVID? So these include key industries like medtech, visitor economy and agriculture, which already provide significant employment but have a lot of growth potential as well. Then we've got some key technological strengths like clean tech and digital technology, and some emerging sectors like aerospace, and further into the medical technology opportunities. As I said, we make sure that we grow jobs across all sectors, but in terms of where Investment New South Wales is going to be most deliberate and most targeted, they're the proactive sectors that we're really looking at. We have some targets that we have to work toward and shoot for the stars. So through our Going Global program. We're really keen to boost exports through that program of around $100 million, and support for scaling businesses along with key export industries like the international education and visitor economy. We will create 5,000 direct jobs and many, many, many more indirect and supporting jobs, because as you know, it's the jobs around that move into the supply chain and also into how people then spend their money in the economy that gets you the kind of biggest bang for your buck. But 5,000 direct jobs will create a lot of economic benefit when we do focus on those key sectors. And when we do look at the state of the economy, these jobs are the ones that are really catalyzing and kickstarting new industries and supply chains. We'll boost innovation expenditure by $50 million, targeting the commercialization of university research, startups, working key precincts, and our priority sectors. And finally, we'll generate 500 million more in wages for people for New South Wales. And our work really needs to have a clear quality focus. It's not just about any jobs. It's good, well-paid jobs that will help people into the future and into the quality of life for themselves and their families. So that is the end of my presentation. I expect there might be a few questions. My esteemed colleague, Eamon Waterford, who has just trained so well over the last few years through his previous employer, he said he'll be on hand to help work through some of the questions, because a lot of this is just as much his ideas as mine. And as I said, I've got an amazing team, so we're all driving this together.
Okay, thank you so much, Amy. And everyone can just see the enthusiasm you bring to this and how much you are across your brief. So let me start by just asking maybe how you think about your role. This tagline, "We make opportunities happen," emphasizing the intention to be proactive. You have your 5 or 6 target industries. But I guess the question is, how do you think about where to be helping specific industries or specific firms on the one hand, versus working on getting the underlying settings right for everybody? We all got it drilled into our heads, don't pick winners, which was because in the 1970s, especially, governments tried to pick these national champion firms and it didn't work. So everybody got burned. That was kind of the Western European experience first, but all through there, of course, many Asian countries had industrial policy. They just were better at it. It's kind of come back into fashion now, I think, in the West to do industrial policy. How do you think about this question of picking specific firms and industries versus the underlying settings?
Oh, it's so hard, isn't it? And Gabe, I think that in terms of when we start to talk about our personal mission, my personal mission well prior to this role was to enable access to opportunities for each and every citizen of New South Wales, so that together we can create a better world. And, I've been kind of all about that for a really long time now. So for me to have to stop and get my head around, okay, well, how do we decide as to which industries, which sectors, which specific organizations we work with. One thing that our economists talk a lot about is, and you actually opened with it, is when we improve kind of productivity of our state, when we create new jobs and create economic benefit, it actually benefits all. It's almost like saying, well, there's a cake, and when we increase productivity through more jobs and more opportunities, it increases the size of the cake. And it might mean that we can all have a bigger bit of cake, or maybe it might mean that people who don't actually have any cake right now could have some cake, which is probably preferable. And so a lot of it is around that kind of how do we actually enhance the prosperity of New South Wales, because a more prosperous state creates more opportunity for all. It creates better education system and public health system and transport system. And so every time that economic benefit is created and new jobs are created, it actually adds to that size. Eamon will definitely have some comments in a second as well. But one thing that we've had to do, again, because we can't work with every single organization in in New South Wales, let alone the world, we've actually tried to say, right, well, where is the biggest bang for our buck? Where are we setting people up with jobs that aren't just jobs for now or jobs for the next 2 years? They're jobs for the rest of their lives. They're jobs in emerging technologies or emerging sectors that will set people up to be able to be productive and fulfilled for a very, very long time beyond now, and where they're making the most of opportunities, for example, in supply chains that don't currently exist in New South Wales. So in my mind, we're grabbing opportunities for the benefit of all. And making sure that where New South Wales government is going to get off the bench and get involved, firstly, it's not economic activity that would have happened anyway, but it's economic activity that specifically would not otherwise have happened if government hadn't gotten off the bench and made it happen. Eamon, do you want to add something to that, given you spend most of your day thinking about these things?
Yeah, and hello everybody. It's so great
Hi,
to be
Eamon.
back. Yeah, look, I think that's critical. We've got a team of economists in Investment New South Wales whose starting point is a general suspicion of additionality of government, and so they keep us honest in this space a lot. But the key question is, will the intervention catalyze additional economic development that wouldn't otherwise happen? So we talk about these industries of the future, like medtech, like cyber. They sometimes need that catalytic intervention, that the agglomeration that then sparks off a whole bunch of additional market-based growth of that sector. And then the other point is one that Amy has made, which is that there's a whole bunch of reasons why we want interventions and economic development to happen that's not worthwhile from the market. We want jobs in Western Sydney, and unless the government, incentivizes, catalyzes some of that to happen, the jobs inevitably just end up where they've always been. But there's really good reasons why, as a society, we want jobs close to where people live. So there are kind of the two reasons why we might intervene: for catalytic reasons or for broader socioeconomic values.
Yeah. And sometimes the intervention's not big, Gabe. Like it's a viability piece. So it's just government just chipping in that bit between what the private sector would do by itself, but it can't quite do because it's not quite viable, or the revenue streams aren't yet proven, or the cost of entry is too high. If we kind of assist with that, or pave the way to make the cost of doing business a bit easier, then off it goes. It's that kind of fire starter. So that's more what we're interested in than funding the whole thing.
Right. And if you've made it very organized to assess those opportunities and make decisions, then it's not always that expensive.
No, it's just that little bit.
All right, a question from Christine Covington about smart cities, which you mentioned. How do you envision Investment New South Wales' role in developing and promoting smart cities? What do you even mean by that, Amy?
I'm all about smart cities. So I don't know if my husband's on watching, actually. I think he might be. So Smart Cities is ably led in New South Wales Government by Simon Hunter and Rory Brown. And I'm married to the one with the same last name as me. But genuinely, regardless of the fact that I talk about it at the dinner table every night, I have a smart cities conversation, I reckon, every second day. And it's either with a global company who wants to invest in smart cities. Oh, and sorry, for context, smart cities and smart places is all about embedding the technology within our place to help us to engage with our place better. So when we're thinking about, doing a new development or precinct, it's making sure that it is kind of 5G enabled, and it does have that, what they call digital plumbing, to set it all up so that as we evolve into the future, we are able to engage with our place and in a lot more of a kind of technologically astute and orientated way. So either I'm talking to companies who have that technology and they want to bring it to New South Wales, or I'm saying to someone, come to Tech Central, and you'll put your business here, and here are all the phenomenal things about that as a precinct, which includes how your employees and how your talent is able to live in that place and have a great quality of experience and high levels of amenity and excitement and culturally vibrant and all of that. And if we get our kind of the technology that exists around us assisting with that, then that's a good place to be.
A question from Ben Hendricks. How much of your focus is helping overseas firms invest or locate here versus helping firms from here export? And I know the field worries a lot about global firms coming in, but just setting up sales and marketing offices and not actually, creating the
Yep.
a bigger cross section of jobs locally. So anyway, how do you balance all of that out?
That's really interesting. And just so you guys are aware, it's back to what Eamon was saying around, we actually quantify what are the jobs benefits for these various initiatives. And if a company is just setting up, something small here in order to kind of, plug its product, that is far less likely to create the big jobs numbers than we need, as would, a big kind of manufacturing or advanced manufacturing facility, for example, where it's lots and lots of employees all having really great, meaningful, future orientated work. So all of that forms part of our analysis. I think traditionally New South Wales has probably been more focused on the trade component in terms of export of New South Wales based products and services, and that's a good thing. But I think by upping our presence globally, we really are interested in hunting for investment to come back into New South Wales, because that's actually where the bigger economic benefit and the bigger jobs numbers come from.
Amy, sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Eamon, go.
There's a third part to this as well. It's helping local firms export, helping global firms come here, but also helping local firms grow within and stay in New South Wales. Too often, some of the great major firms that have been born in New South Wales, we've seen be lured over to Silicon Valley or over to Europe because we don't have the settings right to keep them here. That's one of the things, keeping a job is just as valuable as far as, giving someone a quality of life as creating a new job for that person. In fact, it's probably cheaper and easier to do that. So that's the leg of the stool.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
And it's amazing how many conversations we have with our high talented expats currently in Silicon Valley who are interested in moving home right now. So, it's not just Chris Hemsworth and Nicole Kidman. There are others.
Right. Although they're great. It's a good place to start. Amy, a couple of questions about how you think about telling Sydney's story, New South Wales story to the world. One of them is it New South Wales or is it Sydney? When you're going out to the world, your agency cares about the whole state. We've always argued that in terms of global brand names, you can't very often make a state have a global, a high name recognition globally. Like who knows what state Berlin is in. It is generally a lot easier to have the global brand name be the city. So we have thought that there should be a shift in focus to that, but that's been hard for state-funded agencies to get their head around. How do you approach this?
Sure, Committee for Sydney. I can see where your branding lies, and that's fair enough. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely something we've thought through our own brand and marketing piece. For us, some of it is we need to make sure that we have various kind of ways of expressing ourselves or taglines that brings in lots of different things that people already are familiar with. So, we can talk about New South Wales and then refer to Sydney in the tagline, or Australia, or, the New South Wales, the biggest state in Australia. So people start to understand that, or New South Wales, which has Sydney, it's global kind of. So just making sure that people do start to tie together the Sydney, Australia, New South Wales piece. I think there's a bit of curiosity as well around New South Wales. We are trying to explore the kind of recognition of that globally and what we can do with it. Destination New South Wales is very well known and well recognized globally. And even if you look at their logo, it's in the shape of New South Wales, but has the kind of Opera House sails. And it's a bit of a beautiful kind of mix of people understand the Opera House in Sydney, but it's part of a bigger picture. Eamon, you're leading a bit of the brand work. Do you have a bit more comment on that?
Yeah, look, I think we need to just be a bit relaxed about using what works for the right audience, and there are instances where the New South Wales brand is really strong. We have more arable land in New South Wales, something that actually I'd never picked up on working on the Committee for Sydney, but New South Wales has more arable land per person than any other place in the world. It's actually incredibly rich opportunity for the agri-tech sector in New South Wales. So for that sector, New South Wales is the brand you use. When you're talking digital tech, probably a lot of the time it's going to be Sydney that you're talking about, or Tech Central, these sorts of things. The other area where we've probably not traditionally done great, and I know this is something the committee is passionate about, because I worked on it when I was at the committee, was around this idea of coherent brand, where it's not just about a visitor brand over here and an investor brand over here, and those two not kind of matching up. One of the wonderful things about Investment New South Wales is it brings together the visitor, the international student, the investor, the global talent, all of these different audiences we want to talk to, so that we can have a coherent, singular story that we tell the world.
Yeah, and complement also what regional New South Wales are doing in special activation precincts, and the fact that Parks and Wagga and they're having conversations with global investors to go into very specific regional based locations. So how do we work with that to make sure that we're only enhancing that proposition for them?
Yeah, those are very subtle, nuanced balancings you have to do. Donald McNeil has a great question about how you think about your relationship with Melbourne. And I can just to add a little flavor to that, when we had Richard Florida on doing one of these events earlier in the year, or maybe it's the one before that, we had him do two of these. He really went to this. He said, from a global perspective, you want to be selling Sydney and Melbourne as a combined package, because of, especially for global talent attraction, it makes it a lot more likely that you can have a career that spans both places. And so he had this phrase, you want to collaborate to compete with some mega cities in the world that are just at a bigger scale. I'm not sure if he understands how far apart Sydney and Melbourne are. When you're looking at a map, they look like they're pretty close when you're sitting in Toronto. But I thought it was a pretty insightful comment, sharing from a global perspective, this question about scale. Anyway, curious how you think about that.
Yeah, only a couple of comments from me, and it's actually coming off what the Premier said in answer to this question. I think it was at an AmCham lunch. She's like, there's no need, don't compete with other states. Firstly, if you do want to go and be competitive, we'll compete with Singapore, and Silicon Valley, and whatever other kind of global city or destination for tech and emerging industries. But secondly, I am quite a big believer in Brand Australia, and actually, our market, no matter how you cut it, is tiny compared to the investors that we're talking to overseas in the markets they're used to dealing with. So actually, a win for Team Australia, even if some of the economic activity is spread between us and Queensland, or us and Victoria, or us and South Australia, it's still a win for Team Australia, and it still actually is a good proposition that New South Wales benefits. Would I like to nab every investor and bring them into New South Wales? Of course. But I do agree with that comment that was made. You've got to be a bit more broad-minded than that, and not get kind of silly and competitive with other states, as a proposition.
Yeah. What is the focus of the Sydney Startup Hub and Innovation Ecosystem?
Oh, Eamon, you'll have a comment on this. I think one of the things that I love about bringing together the innovation ecosystem and the startup hub in with Office of the Chief Scientist, R&D, and then the global network, etc., is we can actually assist, we can make something happen right from when it's an idea and a kind of research proposition at a university that then gets kind of translated and commercialized into startup and scale up. We've got MVP grants, we've got other small business innovation initiatives, all the way through to exporting that idea and making it global. So that kind of entire life cycle of a business, I love that we touch every bit of that. As to what the Sydney Startup Hub's fantastic. Eamon can talk more about this, but there's also a scale-up hub that's going into Tech Central. We'll move a lot of that activity into Tech Central once the precinct is kind of up and running. Eamon, he's worked a lot more closely with some of this innovation stuff. What comments do you have?
Yeah,
This is why I want to be on the call.
No. I think that's right, Amy. There's we talked in the Preso about the idea of the sectors that we're based on, and obviously there's precincts that we care about. The other thing is around that technology readiness level, and we've got everything from kind of the engagement with the university sector through to helping out major companies land themselves in New South Wales, and the startup sector and the innovation ecosystem team sit at a crucial lynch point, sort of converting from idea to commercialization. So there's a couple of grants programs they run. They run the Startup Hub where you can get discounted space, which is pretty handy in an expensive city like Sydney. But broadly, what they're also doing is trying to identify the missing links between, I suppose, the incredibly rich underlying traits that New South Wales and Sydney has, universities primarily, and the outputs where we're underperforming a little bit. We don't quite have as many unicorns and major tech firms as we maybe should based on those underlying traits. So it's their job to kind of find the gap, plug it, keep things moving.
Yeah.
A question about your coordination with the Global Business and Talent Attraction Task Force. We've had Peter Verwer here talking with us. As you are doing the inbound recruitment, are you able to package up help with the visas? How does that all work?
Yeah, great. Can you hear me okay? I had to take my earpods. So, call to all innovators out there. If you could just do AirPods that don't need charging, that would be good. But yes, Investment New South Wales has a concierge, right, where we work with business investors of any kind to say, what do you need? What do you need to make your business successful, to be able to locate here or expand or grow or what have you? A lot of the answers to that question sit federally, right? So when I'm talking to a global investor about the barriers, they usually say, in this order, closed borders, visas, FIRB, talent, access to talent, and cost of living, right? So a lot of that is not just have a payroll tax exemption, or here's some access to some state government land that we could potentially kind of subsidize. So it's a lot more complicated than that. So the dream that I want to get to is that we can concierge into the federal government and to be able to kind of help pull their levers as well. Peter Verwer is very proactive in terms of, right, well, if you want that, you need to tell me, give me a list of which business it is and what they need, and we'll work together to make it happen. So I always feel like he has a huge level of permission from the federal government, and we have quite a good level of permission from the state government. So if it can't work now, it never can. So watch this space.
A question about Western Sydney. What are the key barriers, and what are the key ways you overcome barriers about this quite profound commitment government has made now for many years to bring jobs to the West?
Yeah. Yes. So I think a couple of things for us. Given we have certain levers that we can pull to help business, how much of that can we assist by kind of directing traffic almost geographically? And again, a lot of this comes down to the economic development strategies that are being led by our team of economists and economic policy and strategy experts, because how does agglomeration kind of work? And if there are particular leading industries that we want in Western Sydney, how do we enable that to happen? What's the kind of clustering effect that we desire? And what are the particular organizations or types of organizations that if you get them, others follow, that supply chain follows, or the kind of ecosystem follows, and of course the population serving industries follow. And so we're doing a lot of work around the competitive advantages and the natural endowments of what can sit where, but also what is it that make businesses locate where they do? How do they make the decisions they do? And a lot of it is around location of labor, and a lot of it is around the fact that the labor force don't move very often. And so what is it? There's a bit of a human behavior element around what would entice people to want to change jobs and even potentially move their lives and their families to another part of Greater Sydney or New South Wales, and how do we influence some of that? Eamon might have a comment as well.
Just to make that point, that I mean, I think this is a challenge that the government is grappling with both hands, and part of it is you invest a heap into infrastructure that makes it an attractive place. You talk about it constantly and market it on the global stage, and our role in all of that is those catalytic interventions, those pebbles you drop in the pool that drag the center of gravity towards these places that then create the gravitational pull to agglomerate other firms around them. In a way, like some of these, like the Western Parkland City Authority, they're in it for 20 years in the Aerotropolis. We're alongside with them, but often it'll be like, we'll jump in for that bit there to help catalyze that bit there, and we'll jump in over there to help catalyze there, and then leave them to kind of get on with the day-to-day development.
The big stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and Gabe, I loved your call out of fast rail recently, because I think you'll find a 20-minute journey from Newcastle to Parramatta very much changes some decisions that people make around their lives and where they locate their businesses.
Yeah. Transport accessibility changes all of those calculations, doesn't it?
100%.
Amy, I know we said we'd try to get you out at 10 till, but let me close with the hard question that somebody emailed me.
There's been lots of hard questions.
Yeah, you're right. Another one.
Yeah.
Look, it's a question about how you are approaching telling Sydney's story to the world right now. We started 2021 with a big thesis that this was the moment to reposition Australia on the world stage for recruiting investment and global talent and international students based on the success at managing COVID.
Yeah.
And there is still a partially good story to tell about that, but it's gotten a lot more complicated.
Yep.
And Australia's global reputation is really taking a hit because
Yep.
of being last in the OECD to procure vaccines. Like it
Yep.
would have been, if it had been in the middle of the pack, then it would have been a different matter.
Yeah.
But being the
It wouldn't have
very
been
last
obvious. Yeah.
to get vaccines, and has created a sense of, I would say, risk for people to think about if I wanted to get in or I wanted to get out, I might not be allowed to.
Yeah.
Australia no longer seems as safe a bet as it did. So you're not part of that. You weren't in charge of buying the vaccines, but your job is to tell the story to the world.
Right.
What's the best way to approach this conversation that's gotten a bit more complicated?
Yeah, I know. And thank you for calling that out, because it is the reality. Couple of comments, Gabe. Firstly, my first slide in that pack has always remained unchanged, which is the strong position, how awesome New South Wales is, was before COVID and continues to be in terms of, quality of life, access to Asia Pacific markets, opportunities to do business and have a career and have a great family, etc. So that remains the same. There's definitely one of the silver linings around this current situation for me is it's really pushed the commentary on, we actually need a sovereign capability on things like vaccine production. Like we actually need to think how we, as a kind of country on the other side of the earth, can be a bit more self-sufficient when it comes time for stuff like that. And so I actually think that's moved the conversation in the translation of research and development and into, right, who are the global intellectual property holders around some of this stuff and how can we work with them? So it's given me a little bit of extra oomph around investment, particularly in this kind of, pharmaceutical and medical technology space, which is a good thing. But I am, again, I'm a bit of a glass half full person. My hypothesis is New South Wales is fantastic. We're in a difficult situation on the trajectory of a lifetime. It's not that long that we're kind of in this spot of trouble for, and I'm hoping it'll be a bit of a blip on the kind of longer term radar. But again, all I can really do is encourage everybody to get vaccinated ASAP. By the way, all my relatives were vaccinated by AstraZeneca, and my husband's getting the AZ vaccine today. So, just really pushing those messages and using business to help with that story, because the quicker that we're all vaccinated, then the quicker we can just get back to doing business in the most, open-bordered, kind of free physical sense as well.
I suppose we should start doing AstraZeneca commercials at all of these committee webinars, which I got and my 18-year-old son got, and it's what vaccinated the entire UK.
Yeah.
And there's millions of doses waiting to be taken, and we could get out of this lockdown so soon if everybody would just go get it. So good reminder. But Amy, to just yeah, I think your larger point in that answer is it's like, in the big picture, all of the positive stories are still there. So so let's just keep track of the big picture.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Good work.
Amy, thank you so much for taking time, and thank you for bringing Eamon in on this. We miss seeing you on all of these webinars, mate.
Thanks for letting me steal him.
What a big job you guys have to do. Just incredible, and we're going to look forward to following and supporting your work as closely as we can. So thank you.
Yes, and thank you for supporting us.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.